Okay, so I wanted to make a quick demo of my sort of workflow with iPython and Vim. There were some people on Hacker News that asked about it, and it was something I hadn't really thought about before, and I don't think is especially clever. It probably looks pretty primitive from the outside, but I found it works well for me, so I thought I would just do a really quick demo. The first thing to note is that I actually have in my iPython config a couple of lines here which turn on the auto reload system. I don't really know anything about it, but it's quite magical and it helps me a lot when I'm working because it allows me to make changes to my code in the code files and have those reflected next time I use objects which are already instantiated. I'll sort of do a toy example to show how that works and how I use it. It's probably not as obvious from the toy as a bigger app as to why it's so useful. But in a bigger app, you can have a lot of state sort of instantiated before you can start debugging things or working on things. And this allows you to not have to go back and rebuild all of that state every time you want to make a code change. So what I have for this quick demo is just actually something I was doing earlier on today, was a similar sort of thing. This is a sort of slightly smaller version of it, but I've got two PDF files here and I want to compare the text content in them as an HTML file so I can see the highlighted differences between them. This is in the standard library in Python. There is some stuff built in to do this, so we'll make use of that, and I've installed another module which will allow us to kind of extract the text out of the PDF document. My general rule of thumb is to work in iPython as much as possible, and especially right at the start of the project or when I'm experimenting with something, I just stay in there until I've got something that sort of starts to resemble what I want to do. So, inside this folder, let's make a file that we're going to put our code in when it comes to that point. But first, let's start working in iPython. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is actually extract some text out of these two things. And come back to that, I suppose. And the command is, what is it they use to test? This is stuff that I was experimenting with earlier today, so I actually already sort of know how it works, if I can remember. Input file. Yeah. Get some output out of it. Okay, cool. So we've got some code for executing this thing. Let's just change it so that I'm actually getting a variable I can work with here. Okay, fine. So now I have a little snippet of code to work with. So we'll just have a look at it. Like I say, totally primitive. I'll actually copy it into my file. Take out the bits I do need, don't need. Okay, so we've got something useful here, so let's do this as extract from PDF. So we have our first function which can get some text out of the PDF. So if we import this, extract text from PDF, and give it one of these files. Get the actual file right. Okay, it doesn't return anything because we haven't returned anything from the function. So if we just make a change to it in this file, we can see we're getting some results back. Not exactly what we want. We want that. And okay, so we probably now have everything we need from the function. Gives us back a lovely string. We can start working with that. What I'm going to do to sort of simulate more more along the lines of something bigger is stick the stuff in a class, so we can have some more state sort of sitting inside the objects, and we can see how that's useful. Okay. And then when this thing loads, we may as well extract the text out since we know we're going to need it. Okay, cool. So autocomplete doesn't work when you first hit this object. You need to do something to cause it to sort of reload itself. So now that's reloaded, we can create one of these. Okay, so we've got this object should have text 1 in it, text 2, which is all good. We're going to want another function now which does the comparison and outputs it. This is where we just use Python's difflib to do this for us. One thing you don't get with the auto reload is new functions don't show up on your objects. So in this case, for argument's sake, let's add this a new function. So trying to do the autocomplete, it's not showing up. It's not here, so we need to actually recreate this thing. Create it again. We've got this function, and now you see we've got all the state loaded in the object. In this case, it's pretty trivial, but in a more complex app, it could be a lot of state. The one I was working with today, it took a couple of minutes for it to do the text conversion from PDF, so obviously it's not a process you want to repeat every time you're trying to work on it. Call this function, doesn't return anything, it's just for argument's sake, return something, or something more relevant to what we're about to do. So you can see we've got this loaded, we can make changes in our code directly, but also at the same time sort of interrogate that with iPython. For this, we're actually going to need difflib. Let me just pull this stuff out. Okay. So make file, make table, make file. It looks what we want. From lines, 2 lines. So T1, T2. And it's done too much, and I can see actually I went through this earlier. Actually need to split this up for it to do the right thing. So There we go. That's doing the right thing. So now again, same primitive process. So if we go back to our function, call it straight away, we've got that code accessible inside our object without having to go back and reload anything. Let's just actually make sure it does what we want. Fingers crossed. Lovely. That's exactly what we needed. So you can see how in a bigger app it would be really useful to be able to sort of load up the objects that you needed, start interrogating them, and then where there are things that need to be tweaked, just tweak them directly in your code and see that reflected in your objects, so you can see what's actually changed, have the code changed directly without having to worry about reloading data. Like I say, my process tends to be to work in iPython as much as possible until I have code that's sort of very much doing what I want, and then I clean it up, stick it into my code base, work with it a little bit more from there, and then in these sorts of cases where you're already quite far down the line with a larger working code base, it really helps to be able to fire up those objects and then make changes to them on the fly. It's a really quick way of debugging what you've already got. I hope that's useful to some people. If not, I would love to see how some other people approach this sort of stuff. For me, it's definitely, I think, been a real time saver in the way I write and debug my apps. Okay, cheers.